Thank you, Pastor Boyd. Exciting and fun as always, but a very important challenge. It is my honor tonight to introduce our keynote speaker. For those of you old enough to remember the movie, I want to say "To Sir with Love." He is a mentor and a colleague and someone that you are going to really enjoy hearing from. Chuck founded the Charlotte Lozier Institute. It's the 501c3 research and education arm of the Susan B. Anthony List in Washington. The goal of the Charlotte Lozier Institute is to promote a deeper public understanding of the value of human life, motherhood, fatherhood, identify policies and practices that will serve to protect life and serve both. Thank you, honey. Sorry about that. Thank you. The Charlotte Lozier Institute's profound conviction is that the insights that we can bring through science, research, and technology can't help but demonstrate God's plan that each and every human being is fearfully and wonderfully made and blessed to be born at this time in human history. The Charlotte Lozier Institute boasts a cadre of over 75 associate scholars from around the country, from a variety of scientific disciplines. And CLI also provides pro-life groups and policymakers research and resources, which we have used here in Indiana extensively, on information including issues like women's health, prenatal diagnosis and treatment for the unborn, perinatal hospice, abortion reporting, statistical issues, sex selection, abortion. Chuck, sign her up. Will you just really make a good scholar? Stem cell research and medicine and healthcare policy. But he also had the vision and the courage to punch back at Planned Parenthood and its scientific arm, the Guttbacher Institute, and the liberal media by throwing in the correct use of science when the incorrect use of science is usually touted in the media and by the woke medical community. As you can see from Chuck's bio, and I plead with you to read his bio, and especially the Reagan speechwriter and all kinds of things that he has done in his career. He's fantastic. But you're going to see that he himself is a scholar extraordinaire. I do encourage you to read some of his work. When I read Chuck's writing, I hear a symphony. He's such a good writer. And you're going to hear a little bit of that tonight. On the human side, Chuck is a human. He's terrific. He's a delightful person. He's a friend and a colleague with a brilliant mind and a heart of gold. His sense of humor is just stunning. Listen closely tonight for Chuck's sassy, pithy, dry humor but yet it's oh so poignant, so bare, so real, so meaningful. He'll touch your heart for sure. Chuck Donovan is a national treasure, and it's a real treat that we can hear from him tonight. Hope you enjoy. Thank you. Chuck?
Good evening. I think I should just second that and sit down. It's amazing to be here tonight, to be here with so many wonderful people. I want to recognize the Reverends Boyd and Reverend Simmons I sat with, Reverend McCarthy, there may be others in the crowd, the legislators who stood tall, your president, Mark Tuttle, I got the pleasure to meet today, and the other officers. You know, I reflect on my last 51 years in the pro-life movement, and I have to say, standing here, this is not a day, especially in the last 10 years or so, that I expected to see. There were so many ups and downs, and I want to talk about a few of those. But so many people young and old, not people of wealth. This is the least funded movement in the world. Kids, don't worry, we're going to raise more money tonight so you can work in pro-life. But it's not where you jump to get social credits and get on the government payroll, as some groups manage to do. It's sacrifice. But what has happened here? A 49-year, 4-month, and 2-day precedent of the Supreme Court, which some thought was untouchable, has been overturned. Here in Indiana, with SB 1 and your legislative leadership, and I know a little bit of the inside story, and I'm going to tell some more of it from a federal perspective. Now 95% plus of the babies in the state of Indiana have legal protection. And all I want to say to that is, boy, was that easy. But now here comes some hard parts. I'd like to begin, though, by talking about something that my bio doesn't really fairly represent. I do have a place in Virginia. We go up there and fight with the Congress, which is no fun. We have a place in Ohio where I grew up. But the truth is, my pro-life history is Indiana. I began my first year in pro-life in 1971. 2 years before Roe versus Wade. I'd like to say it was my plan, clever as could be, but it wasn't. I was a student at the University of Notre Dame, and I tooled back and forth on 74 and US 31 a dozen times a year, usually like this. This was 1971. Nobody does it now. But penniless college students do all sorts of things. I expected to major in all sorts of things, which I did. I had about 5 majors. And I ran into someone on campus who turned out to be the daughter of J.C. Wilkie. Now, I know I'm going to mention people that are back there in the realms of history, and my thank yous go to all of you tonight, but there are an awful lot of people, and I'm going to mention a couple who aren't here, who need to be remembered and honored. And I treasure the idea that they see this day from near the throne of grace, and they're rejoicing in heaven. But in any event, I've met Dr. Jack Wilkie's daughter at a Notre Dame football game, and we went out a little bit for a year, and she told me what her father did for a living, which was champion life. And I said, what's with that? And she put me in touch with Charlie Rice, a great law professor at Notre Dame. He gave us a briefing and he said, this is coming. The Supreme Court is going to do something awful on abortion. Well, he put together the first student pro-life group at Notre Dame. I was the vice president. A gentleman named Mark Souter from Indiana was the president. I treasure Mark. He passed away last week. He served many terms in Congress and advocated for life and many other good things. And Mark, unlike me, was evangelical. I was Catholic. It's not a major theme tonight, but I love the fact that people of faith have grown closer together while they fight for these little ones. It's one of the biggest blessings. So he founded the first Notre Dame pro-life group. We recruited students. I changed my major, not literally, well, actually literally it was, to English, because I didn't think that would be all that challenging. It is. Cut my credit hours down to the minimum to remain a student, and Mark and I traveled the Midwest, all over Indiana recruiting students, to Minnesota, to Illinois. I even went on the Purdue campus. I love Purdue. I had a lot of friends go there. And, you know, we set out on this work for life. I'm always overjoyed to hear that the largest student group at the University of Notre Dame right now is the pro-life group, 900 plus members. But the story doesn't end there. I had been involved in various things. I'm going to talk about a couple of them, but my last enterprise is the one that Sue lifted up a moment ago. That's the Charlotte Lozier Institute. Now, our slogan, I have to warn you, is science and statistics for life. If you brought a pillow and you want to lean back and get a good night's sleep and begin it here, I understand. But when we created the organization, we had to figure out a name. What do you call a pro-life science group? Well, there's some good options out there, but we were part of Susan B. Anthony's list. That story about Susan B. Anthony is one of the biggest of many big lies that have been told in the history of American political life. Why? Because Susan B. Anthony and her colleagues were incredibly pro-life. They saw the advancement of women as being paralleled by an appreciation for their roles as mothers and leaders of families. And they lived in a generation that endured exploitation. We live in one now. So we went looking for another feminist who was a scientist in medicine. Well, there are a few. Elizabeth Blackwell, feminist leader, pro-life. Planned Parenthood stole her name and put it on one of their clinics. We couldn't go that route. We found another, Charlotte Denman Lozier, or Lozier, as I later learned is how her name is pronounced. She was one of the first graduates of New York Medical College who happened to be a woman. She was mocked relentlessly in the classroom by several men of my sex. She persisted. She became the vice president of the National Association of Working Women. We're talking mid-1800s here. And she came to the attention of Susan B. Anthony and the Revolution magazine when a man came to her from overseas and brought with him a woman he had seduced and impregnated. And he wanted her to perform an abortion. She did what any self-respecting pro-life feminist would do. She had him arrested. She provided medical help to the woman who had been violated and was about to be aborted. And she wrote in an article, or it was said of her in an article in the Revolution, and these are her exact words, she insists that as the commission of crime is not one of the functions of the medical profession. A person who asks a physician to commit the crime of antenatal infanticide can no more be considered his patient than one who asks him to poison his wife. She was the perfect name for our institute. On top of that, and tragically, she had 3 children before the age of 27. And she gave her life bearing the last one, almost a century before antibiotics. Well, the story ends even more happily because we found out, doing some research, that the last child, Jessica, born to Charlotte Denman Lozier, did survive while the mother did not, and this woman had descendants, and they're alive. And guess what? They live in Indiana. Chrissy Riley and Melissa Keys, other members of the family, came to visit us in Washington, D.C. I have to say, when we got the email, I held my breath and went, oh, are they going to sue us? It's America. And they did the exact opposite. They rejoiced with us. We dined together. And we are planning to go to the Cincinnati Zoo someday together. So I wanted to mention them. I've mentioned Mark. Dan Avila is a good friend up in Fort Wayne. Some of you may know him. Phyllis Avila was also a mentor for media for me. And Jackie Walorski, who was a stalwart in Congress I met with any number of times. She stood up for life, and we miss her. Well, that's Indiana. What about happened next? I did graduate from Notre Dame, and this is the part of this speech that if you are young, may not encourage you, but I think you should be encouraged by it because it's got so many positive things. You would think, with a cause in my mind, a decent academic record, a nice degree from Notre Dame de Lac, that I would be pointed directly towards what I wanted to do in life. Not so. I applied to 3 graduate schools in English, got into one of them. Then I decided I'd go to Europe for 7 months, which I did. I don't know what else I did, but I was over there. And I came back to the family home in Cincinnati, and I did what almost every young adult male does these days. I moved into the basement. Right, Mary? I moved into the basement, and I would like to say it was a remodeled room. Not much. It had what was then called a rollaway bed, which means it went into the wall somewhere and you could pull it out at night. It had a few tires on a ledge. I don't know why we were keeping them. We just kept stuff. And then I decided to do the brilliant thing. I did some newspaper writing. I reported on the Indiana, again, basketball tournament for the Cincinnati Enquirer. Went to these little towns that happened to have 10,000-seat arenas and wrote stories, calling it in over the phone. And the other thing I did was volunteer full-time for Cincinnati and Ohio Right to Life. Now you can imagine what my parents thought, what is this kid doing? I was a volunteer, seriously. Occasionally there would be some gas money, and we'd use that. I also signed up for every government newsletter I could find. This was the key. I signed up for the World Bank newsletter. And over the course of 4 years of penniless living in the basement, I had learned a lot about how our government finances bad stuff. The World Bank, I think they still do it. They use money from the federal treasury, and they'd hang it over the heads of poor countries, and they'd say, you accept these population targets, including abortion, or this aid is going away. They held desperate people hostage, and there's a lot of writing about it now. So I knew a lot about that, but I was still unemployed. What do? I did another research project, and I found that federal Title X clinics in Ohio were receiving federal money, the Title X money, and performing abortions contrary to law. I thought, I'll write this up for Ohio Right to Life. So I did. And I thought that was the end of it, one more volunteer project. But somebody at National Right to Life, I don't know who, came up and said, this is really good. Can you do this for the whole country? I said, well, sure, it's the same databases. Let's make a list. And we made a list of several hundred clinics in violation of federal law. I went to Washington, D.C. on a train. You remember those things that used to carry people? And I got to Washington, D.C. and sat at my desk, and they said, you've got a 30-day job. You can't imagine how a 26-year-old man was thrilled with a 30-day job. Pro-life, it's not wealthy now. Reverend Boyd, I know. Reverend Simmons, I know. But it was even worse then. There was hardly anything. So I finished my 30 days, and as God would have it, the lobbyist quit. We needn't get into her reason. She was a fine woman. And somebody was standing around and saw a guy in the corner writing in a yellow legal pad and said, would you like to do this? They gave me the pay stub, and I said, what's more than I'm getting now? I took the position. Now, I can drag all of this out for hours, and your pillows won't even work at that point. But I got to know someone who had no idea who she was. She was a pro-life lobbyist in the National Press Club. Turned out she was the former private secretary to Richard Nixon. And without knowing anything, because I like to write, I would be asked by her to write their letters to the Hill and edit some testimony and stuff. And when Ronald Reagan came along, she was one of the architects who secured a letter from him to pro-life leaders saying he supported the right to life and amending the U.S. Constitution to protect it. It helped turn his campaign around. He became president. And then a month later, or a month after he was sworn in, she called me and said, "I'm over here at the White House. Would you like to work here?" I hesitated about, 3 nanoseconds and said, "I'll do that." Unbelievable. I had no idea that she was connected in that way. So I was hired as a writer for President Reagan in 1981. Now that sounds like a big up, right? We're making progress now. But about 2 weeks before I joined the White House, the assassination attempt came. And I was walking down the steps inside the Cannon House office building when somebody ran out of the office and said Reagan had been shot. The Reagan administration itself was a series of ups and downs. Reagan was pro-life, and I'm going to underscore that in a minute. I have no doubt about it. But the first thing he did of substance riled the pro-life movement to its core. He nominated Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. I had worked for National Right to Life, and its president, Carolyn Gerster, called me and said, "Disregard whatever they're telling you," and they were telling us she was fine. "This woman is trouble. She is not pro-life." Carolyn risked her career, her relationship. Reagan got personally angry at her for standing up. And we were unable, God bless my boss, Ann Higgins, in the White House. She said, "Go to the Library of Congress and find out whatever you can. So don't tell anybody." For 3 days, I was on the White House staff researching Contra Sandra Day O'Connor. And we proved, I think without a doubt, that she was totally untrustworthy on life. But who were we? Correspondence shop. We failed in the effort, and it looked like we were in deep water. Reagan came back and endorsed several measures in the Congress, both of which failed in 1982 and 1983. And his support for those was genuine. I believe he actually thought Sandra Day O'Connor would be fine for life. So I got to see the president up close, and somebody said to me recently, "Well, Reagan didn't really do anything." And I said, well, he made a mistake with Justice O'Connor, who, by the way, didn't embarrass Reagan while she was on the Supreme Court while he was in the White House. And then he came back and nominated Robert Bork, who was savaged, would certainly have been a pro-life vote. And I may have this wrong, but I think Justice Antonin Scalia was the third. So he delivered as much as he could. And I will say to you, while he wrote and delivered speeches on pro-life to the Knights of Columbus, to other organizations, what I got to see was his personal handwriting on various issues, letters to people that Ann Higgins, and if you ever get this, kids, at the White House, remember this. You control what the president sees, you control a lot. So Reagan got a packet of 30 letters every week from our shop. You better believe, not that we put in pro-life letters, we put in the opposite. And he'd write back. Those letters are magnificent. Some of them are published, most of them are not. But I came to understand just how deeply pro-life he was. Okay, so you get to the end of the administration. This is a nonsense story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. I didn't see the president that much. I did get to exchange notes and edits and things like that on, I would say, a daily basis. And he was a magnificent human being, but on one occasion, he was taking off for the Alf Landon dinner in 1988, and Ann Higgins said, "We can go over and watch him take off." Now, it was at night, so there was no big public event. So we go racing over to the ground floor of the West Wing. And there he is standing talking to his personal physician, Dr. Hutton. So Ann gestures me to come up. Well, should I come up and stand next to the president talking to his doctor? She goes, yeah. So I go up thinking, oh, they're going to be talking about some serious topic for the speech at the Landon dinner. And Reagan was saying to Hutton, no, John. In 1930, Alabama and Notre Dame shared the national title. In 1929, Notre Dame had it themselves. And I just cheered. Anyway, my last day in the White House, second last day, I got to stand in the Rose Garden with my parents, who had sent 6 children to Notre Dame. And the Notre Dame football team came in and met with the president, Lou Holtz, the entire team. And I got the chance to talk to Lou. I was intimidated, actually. And Reagan accepted a gift of George Gibbs' letter sweater. So there was just a small number of people there, but I thought it summed up his time. And as we get to the point where we are now, where we have done the near impossible and reversed a Supreme Court decision, I know that Ronald Reagan rejoices in heaven. I do hope some who disappointed him will recognize that. Anyway, so we're going to shift gears a little bit. And now I want to talk about the future. Our future is not going to be easy. I see this as a chance to start over. But look at our country's history. How many chances can one nation get? I don't know if we're exceptional. I don't know if we're unique. I do think the Lord has given us an exceptional number of chances to get things right. And a mechanism that when applied with peace, persistence, persuasion, and personal commitment, we get those changes. We can get them still. And I like to say that Lozier, as boring as we are, we're about science and numbers. And now I'm going to proceed to totally contradict myself. Our numbers are important. Our science is important. We were pleased, and this is the only commercial for tonight, that the Charlotte Lozier Institute was footnoted in more than a quarter of the pro-life briefs submitted to the Supreme Court. All peer-reviewed, incredible research. So that's great. But I don't think, as much as I love numbers, train for them, as much as I love the science, that's not how you win a public policy fight. First, there's prayer. The United States does not survive without prayer. When I worked for President Reagan, glorious days up in the old executive office building, you pull down the volumes of the writings of the presidents, unmistakable. You have to ignore so much to not see these men. And someday women, I hope. Sue would be a great choice. They laid the fate of their country and of their endeavors at the feet of God. So I believe life is more about courage, compassion, and character. Yes, that baby at 15 weeks pumps 26 quarts of blood per day. It's a busy little fellow or girl. There are 54 million heartbeats. Stacey Abrams can't find one, but well, maybe she finds a few later, but 54 million beats from conception to birth, actually from 3.5 to 4 weeks, always denominated that way. I just like to joke. Planned Parenthood, they say, and they changed on their website reference to the heartbeat, right? But when Texas passed the heartbeat law, they stopped doing procedures at 6 weeks. How did they know? But numbers don't rule the day, and more often than not, and especially for young people, you have to be willing. You have to be willing to wait, but then you have to be willing to stand tall. Let's take Plessy versus Ferguson, May 8th, 1896, ratifying, enforcing segregation in the United States after Homer Plessy tried to take a regular seat on a train in Louisiana. He was barred by the segregation law. What did the court do on May 18th? It upheld segregation even after the Civil War, 500,000 dead, 3 constitutional amendments. It upheld separate but equal. The vote was 7-1. What did it take to be the one? It was John Harlan of Kentucky. He personally didn't disagree with slavery, but he looked at the law and he said, this says otherwise. These rights belong to all of us. Now, I'm kind of phased out about CRT. I think it's a distraction, but every school child in America should read John Harlan's opinion, not merely for what it said, but because a man was willing to stand against all of his colleagues. Brown v. Board of Education. This is the reversal of Plessy, 58 years. Now, that's a decade less than we did with Roe, but way too long. What was the count on the court? 9-0. They are all in agreement. You'd like to think that the American people immediately came behind this decision. Afraid not. In 1958, the Gallup poll asked the question whether or not people of different races should be allowed to marry. Virginia barred it. A number of states did. 4% of Americans thought that it was okay for blacks and whites to marry. 1958. 100 Southern politicians signed on to a Southern manifesto for massive resistance to Brown v. Board. And you may know a lot of the stories, but the point is, things aren't instantly popular no matter how right they are. In June 12, 1967, the Loving decision came down, again, 9-0. The court united behind it. And now, half a century later, 96% of Americans agree. And it makes me think of the June 24th Dobbs debate. We've heard a lot of polls. You'll hear lots of them from here on out. I'm afraid to say I think our political leaders are very fond of citing, well, this poll, that poll. Okay. But sometimes you have to stand up when you're the one. Sometimes you're right when you're with the 4%. It isn't a numbers game. We love numbers at Charlotte Lozier, but it's about courage, compassion, and ultimately character, because courage without character can simply be bluster. So I've been thinking lately, and I do have a picture or two. I don't know if we can go to them. I'm supposed to go to them, aren't I? Oh, I'm bad. That's our logo. Don't forget it. That's a slide about the population bomb. Very minor point. We're not here because women demanded it. There are forces in our society that are weighing down from above. The Rockefellers were key to it. Talk some other time. They've desolated a country. In fact, the planet. It's just dawning on us. Japan is down nearly 1 child per family. Robots tending to the elderly. China, after its 1-child policy, now has a 3-child policy. Just as bad, and it won't work because they've trained the people out of the habits of family and individual life. This is a house in Pennsylvania. I honestly don't know if it was abandoned because the family died off, but we have it in the United States. Our birth rate's at 1.7. It's not in the media. It's beginning to creep into the media, but one of the reasons why people are not appearing at the window to help with things and craftsmen are not around, it's because when you take 900,000 lives a year, some things go away. Just my opinion. Let me go on to this. I would have asked at the beginning how many of you knew what Charlotte Lozier was. Don't put your hands up. It's embarrassing for me. How many people know what this is? Any hands? All right. It's a big crowd of people. They look like they're the National Softball Association championships, right? Blue shirts, yellow shirts, little kids in front. if you look really closely on the lower right side, there's a little girl holding her younger brother or sister who clearly has Down syndrome. We'll skip this one. These are the scholars for Charlotte Lozier. And we'll go to what I call the alternatives. This building is 3801 Lancaster, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. How many know what happened there? Good. It's the office, incredibly awful office, occupied Dr. Kermit Gosnell. The picture I just showed you is 1 mile away from here. The women who were treated there had their babies withdrawn and stabbed in the neck to kill them. He had a separate floor. That upper floor there with the panels in front of it was for minority patients. He was himself a minority, but he practiced segregation, and his more well-to-do late-term abortions were done downstairs. So we go back here. What is that? That is called the Fetal Family Reunion. It's not the pro-life movement's name, but I like it. Fetal Family Reunion, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, June 2016. These are all the families and babies who got the most advanced medical care in utero in the world. Thousands. Fetal surgeries, some of them now as early as 15 weeks. The Congress is hesitating to protect the baby at 15 weeks. Here they're protecting and saving babies in the hundreds and thousands. What is that? That's June 2022. You'll see it's a different spot because they don't fit in the courtyard anymore. They moved this celebration of the Fetal Family Reunion to the Philadelphia Zoo, just so that everyone could fit in it. Well, you've been very kind to listen this far, and I want to talk about just one more set of numbers. I've seen different numbers on how many babies have been lost to abortion in the United States. I'll go with 63.5 million. Back in the beginning of the day when the Rockefeller Commission recommended that the U.S. population stop growing completely, there were 207 million people in the United States. We have about 330 million now. Think about it. What abortion has done has been to sweep a third of our little stars from the sky. A third of the people who should be here at least are gone. How do you imagine in the gratitude for what's not happening now or in the sorrow for what's happened before, how do you imagine 63 million babies? We heard a little bit of math earlier about the state of Indiana and California. I don't wish California on anyone right now. But if we emptied this room and refilled it for the next dinner and the next dinner and the next dinner, it would be 79,000 times emptying and refilling this room. It's the toll of abortion. No, you can't. The number doesn't help me. It's overwhelming. So what can we do? I think we can do what the scripture says and reduce the meaning of any number to its most powerful import. Those two pictures are from Ground Zero. Every year, of course, the names of every person who died in the attack on the World Trade Center is read out loud, and so too are each of the unborn children who died. Their names are carved into that monument like every other person who died. There are 11 in total. We do count them. And I like to believe that in counting those 11, we can symbolize how this nation can and should feel about the value of every life. There were 100 children in utero that day when the towers fell. Obviously, wives of people who worked there. Now, I've seen a lot in my time. I didn't see this, but my daughter did from her dorm window at NYU. But Planned Parenthood, being the stylistic population people they are, offered free abortions to anyone who was touched by the tragedy. From what I've read, not a single woman took it. This year, more than 100 children who were born after their fathers died reached the age of 21 and enter their adult lives. It's even recorded in Slate magazine where they use the word unborn child. They can't help themselves. There's a phrase in the Talmud that to me says all of this. We can't reconcile ourselves with 63 million lives. We can't grasp it. We sometimes grasp it through the loss of one of our own, but it's bigger than that. The Talmud says, he who saves a single life saves the world entire. Think about that. I don't know whether post-Dobbs will save 200,000 babies or 500,000. I don't know if New York will take more lives. Planned Parenthood's numbers are going up. I don't know. I do know there will be lives saved. And I do know that every life we save is a world entire. We rejoice in that. We celebrate that. We see it in each other's eyes. And I say for another year, let's just ask ourselves, did I save a life yesterday? Did I help save one today? If I did, it's a world entire. One last thing, because Reverend Boyd moved me so much. My sister and I are here. My gift to this event last year was $0. All right, I'm writing a check for $1,000 when I sit down, and I challenge as many of you as can do the same. I'm not promising to match. But if we match each other in love and grace, and we work for the moms, the fathers too, and the babies, we will win this thing. Thank you.